Have you ever stopped in the middle of a project and ask yourself, why are we actually doing this? Not what's the deadline, not who's the stakeholder, not when is the next status meeting, but why does this project even exist? Now, wait, if you don't know the answer to that question, your project could already be in trouble. Oh, did I say that out loud? Well, okay, listen, because here's what I've learned over the years of leading projects. A project can have an approved budget, a detailed schedule, an experienced project team, executive sponsors, weekly status meetings, and that beautiful project plan. But if people don't understand why the work matters, they will eventually start treating important work like optional work. And once that happens, no project schedule in the world can fix it. I have to admit something though. I don't think enough project managers talk about what we're going to discuss today because when I was early in my career, and honestly, even later in my career, when I inherited projects that were already in flight, I was excited to get started. I wanted to meet the team, build relationships, review the schedule, understand the risk, and of course, start solving problems because that's what project managers do, right? We solve problems. However, there was a document that I often treated like a formality instead of a leadership tool. That's the project charter. I knew it existed. I knew it had to be approved, but I wanted to start delivering results. And if I can just be transparent with you, sometimes the charter wasn't very good. The purpose was vague. The objectives sounded like corporate buzzwords. The business case felt like it had been copied and pasted from another project. But instead of asking better questions, I just accepted the ambiguity. And that's where the real mistake happened. Because just because something isn't clear doesn't mean it isn't important. It means someone has to create clarity. Eventually, the project would move into execution. Tasks were assigned, meetings were scheduled, status reports were sent. Everyone looked like they were doing their job exceptionally well. But something just felt off. The team wasn't moving with urgency. Deadlines slipped just enough to become frustrating. People weren't saying that the project was important. They were acting like it wasn't important. So what do we do as project managers? You know what we do. We push harder. We ask for updates. We send reminder emails. We schedule another meeting on top of another meeting. And then we explain the deadline again and again. And then we wonder why no one cares as much as we do. However, the problem usually isn't the team doesn't care. The problem is that they don't understand why they should care. I want you to think about that for a second. The project manager never took the time to understand the purpose of the project. How can they expect the team to understand it? That realization, it changed the way I approach every project afterwards because I stopped believing in my first responsibility was building a project schedule or a project plan. And I started believing my first responsibility was actually discovering the project's purpose. Everything else became easier after that. Here's a reflection, family. Have you ever noticed how easy it is to mistake activity for progress? As project managers, we're trained to build schedules, facilitate meetings, manage risk, resolve issues, and of course, keep stakeholders involved. Those are all essential responsibilities, but somewhere along the way, many of us begin to believe that our greatest value comes from keeping the project moving. However, a project that is moving quickly in the wrong direction is still moving in the wrong direction. I've learned that one of the most powerful questions a project manager can ask isn't, are we on schedule? It's, does everyone understand why this project matters? See, when a team understands the purpose behind the work, priorities become clear, decisions become easier, challenges become opportunities to solve rather than obstacles to avoid. The project gains momentum because people see how their work contributes to something bigger than the next task on the board. But when the purpose is missing, something very different happens. Meetings become routine, tasks become checkbox, deadlines become, that's a great suggestion. The project manager finds himself pushing harder and communicating more, wondering why the team isn't responding with that same sense of urgency. And most of the time, it isn't because the team lacks talent. And it's not because they're lazy. And if I'm being transparent, it's really not because they don't care. It's because no one has connected their work to a meaningful outcome. And if we're being honest, the responsibility often begins with us as project managers. We can't expect our teams to champion a purpose that we've never taken the time to fully understand ourselves. Here's the lesson. A project schedule tells us how to keep track of the task activities. A project status report tells you the health of the project, but a project why tells them why it deserves their best effort. Never assume that because a project has been approved, everyone understands its purpose. One of the greatest leadership responsibilities of a project manager is to transform a documented objective into a shared mission. When people understand why the work matters, they don't just complete tasks, they become invested in the outcome. Today, I like to share a couple principles with you that have changed the way I think about leading projects. And I believe they'll change the way you lead yours as well. And I'm going to tell you, you might not get this right every time because you're going to go into go mode just like myself, meaning wanting to get something done. But we have to put our best foot forward and continue to move forward. Principle number one, clarity creates urgency. One of the biggest misconceptions in project management is believing that urgency comes from deadlines. I wish that was true, but it isn't. Deadlines simply tell people when something is due. Clarity tells people why it deserves their attention. Think about the projects you worked on throughout your career. Have you ever been on a project where leadership keeps emphasizing that everything was a top priority? Every email was marked urgent. Every meeting ended with, well, we need this as soon as possible. But after a while, something interesting starts happening. The team stop responding with urgency, not because they're lazy and not because there's a lack of experience. They simply don't understand why this particular project mattered more than the dozens of other priorities that's competing for their attention. That's why I believe one of the first responsibilities of a project manager isn't building a schedule, it's creating clarity. Because when people understand the business problem, the customer impact, or the organizational objective, they naturally begin making better decisions without being reminded every day. However, clarity just doesn't happen by accident. It requires intentional conversation. It requires asking better questions. And sometimes it even requires challenging vague project objectives until everyone shares the same understanding. Here's a lesson, family, I want you to think about. People don't become urgent because the project manager tells them to move faster. They become urgent when they clearly understand what success looks like and why it matters. Your first responsibility as a project manager isn't simply managing tasks, it's actually eliminating confusion. Here's two actionable tips I'd love for you to experiment with. First, before your next kickoff meeting, answer one question for yourself. If someone asks me why this project exists, can I explain it in less than 60 seconds? If not, continue asking questions until you can. Second, don't assume the project charter has all the answer. Use it as a starting point for conversation with your sponsor, your business owner, and your stakeholders. Sometimes the greatest clarity comes from dialogue, not documentation. Here's my professional advice, family. One question has transformed the way I begin projects. Instead of asking, what are we building? I ask, what problem disappears if we're successful? That single question has uncovered more clarity than almost any project document I've ever reviewed. And once everyone understands why the project exists, you already know the next challenge becomes helping them understand the why it matters. That's where the second part of this why framework begins. Principle number two, purpose drives better decisions. Have you ever noticed how the project team seems to make good decisions even when the project manager isn't in the room? That's not by luck. That's alignment. Projects are filled with difficult decisions. Should we prioritize speed or quality? Did we accept this change request? Should we spend more money now to reduce future risk? Or should we delay the release or launch with known limitation? Those type of decisions become incredibly difficult when everyone is using a different definition of success. But when the team understands the purpose behind the project, purpose becomes the filter for every decision. Instead of asking, what do I want? The conversation becomes, which option best supports why we're doing this project? Notice how powerful that shift is, family? Because see, the purpose removes emotion from many difficult conversations because everyone is evaluating decisions against the same objective. However, purpose isn't something you mention once during a kickoff and never revisit it. Purpose should be part of your leadership rhythm, every milestone, every steering committee, every major decision, and every significant change. Reconnect the team to the mission. Here's a lesson, family, I want you to think about. Purpose isn't motivation. Mm-mm. Purpose is operational. It becomes a decision-making filter that keeps projects aligned long after the kickoff is over. Here's 2 actionable tips I'd love for you to experiment with. First, whenever your team faces a difficult decision, ask which option best supports the business outcome we're trying to achieve. Next one, watch how quickly opinions begin aligning around value instead of preference. Oh, I like that, family. Second one, revisit project purpose during every major milestone. People naturally become consumed by tasks and deadlines. So your role, your opportunity is to continually reconnect today's work with tomorrow's outcome. Here's my professional advice. I've learned that stakeholders don't always remember every milestone. They rarely remember every meeting, but they always remember whether the project solved the problem it was actually intended to solve. Lead toward outcomes, not activities. And let me just say this. Understanding the why the project exists, it does create clarity. Using purpose creates alignment. But there's one final step that separates managers from actual exceptional leaders, helping people personally connect to the mission. Principle number 3, ownership sustains momentum. Here's something I also observed over and over again. The best project teams don't wait to be reminded. They don't wait for status meetings. They don't wait for escalation. They see problems. They solve problems. You probably say, well, why, ED? Because they no longer feel like a participant. They feel like owners. Ownership isn't created through authority. It isn't created through job title. It certainly isn't created by sending another follow-up email. Ownership develops when people believe their work genuinely matters. When a developer understands how their feature improves a customer experience, when a business analyst understands how better requirements reduce friction and frustration across the organization, when testers understand that finding defects protects customers instead of simply delaying release, their work becomes meaningful. Meaning creates commitment. However, ownership begins with us. If we have not connected our team to the mission, we certainly can't be surprised when they simply complete a assigned task instead of actively protecting the project's success. Leadership isn't about convincing people to care. Leadership is about helping them discover why they should care. Here's the lesson I want you to think about, family. Ownership is the natural result of clarity and purpose. When people understand why the project exists and how it creates value, they begin treating the project's success as their own responsibility. Here's 2 actual tips I'd love for you to experiment with. First, during your next team meeting, ask each team member, how does your work contribute to the project's success? Their answer will quickly reveal whether ownership has taken root. Second, celebrate outcomes instead of only completed tasks. Help people see the impact of their contribution, not just the work that they finish. Here's my professional advice, family. One of the greatest compliments a project manager can receive isn't hearing, well, you managed that project well. It's actually hearing the team took ownership. That's when you know you move beyond managing work and started leading people. See, a project charter may authorize the project manager as well as the work. A project plan may organize the body of the work. A schedule may measure the actual task of the actual work. But the why framework transforms the work because when people have clarity, when they're connected to a purpose, when they take ownership projects, they stop feeling like assignments. They become missions worth accomplishing. Here's my final reflection, family. As we wrap up today's episode, I like to leave you with one final thought, or maybe a couple. One of the reasons why I wanted to share the why framework with you today isn't because I've mastered it. It's because I have to intentionally remind myself to actually use it. Even after all these years of leading projects, I still have moments where I become so focused on execution that I jump straight into the work. I start thinking about the schedule right away, the budget, the scope, the risk, and of course, the deliverables. Because I want to make sure we finish on time, on budget, within scope, and with exceptional quality. And those things matter. I mean, they absolutely do matter. But when I become too focused on execution, sometimes moving faster than my actual leadership, what tends to happen is, and this has happened every single time I do, the project reminds me, not immediately, it usually starts with something small, a conversation where two stakeholders have completely two different expectations. A team member who isn't moving with urgency as I expected. A decision that should have been just simple suddenly becomes a debate. Ownership begins to fade. Communication starts becoming reactive instead of proactive. Tiny little cracks begin appearing across the project. At first, I attempted to solve each crack individually. However, experience has taught me to stop asking, how do I fix it? And instead, what did we miss? More often than that, the answer isn't buried in the schedule. It isn't hidden in the raid log. It isn't even another status meeting. The answer usually takes me back to the beginning. We move so quickly that we never created enough clarity. We assume everyone understood their purpose. We believe ownership would have naturally developed on its own. That's when I reminded myself to go back to the why framework. Why are we doing this? How does this create value? How does your work contribute to making this successful? Every time I revisit those three questions, something remarkable happens. The conversations improve. Alignment begins to return. People begin making better decisions. Ownership grows stronger. And what looked like a project problem often turns out to a leadership opportunity. That's why I'm sharing the framework with you. Not because I perfected it, because I committed to practicing it. And maybe that's what leadership really is. Not always having all the right answers, but having the humility to return to the principles that consistently make us better. As I close, family, I just want to thank you for your time today. And as you begin your next project, remember the why framework. Why are we doing this? How does this create value? And what's your role in making it successful? Those three questions have the power to create clarity, purpose, and ownership before the work ever begins. And remember, sets and reps beat talent when talent doesn't do the reps. If you're new to the episode, I go by the name ED. For all you smart and intelligent folks out there, hey, listen, that just simply means it. Until next time.